And good morning, everyone. Meteorologist Steve Caparata here. We're going to give you an update on the tropics. The Atlantic has sprung to life here over the last couple of days. And as you've probably heard by now, we're keeping a close eye on something in the Caribbean that we think will be in the Gulf of Mexico by next week. So obviously that's going to get a lot of attention. It's kind of a wait and see game on that right now, though. We still are waiting for something to develop. I don't think it's going to happen today, might not even happen tomorrow. It may not be until the weekend that the system really starts to crank up, but once it does, it may start to crank up fairly quickly, and then we watch closely as it potentially moves into the Gulf of Mexico into next week. So let's give you a look at what we're tracking this morning. First off, this is the big picture. So we've got Fiona, which is looking awfully healthy this morning. Category 4 hurricane. Bermuda is under hurricane warning. We got Tropical Storm Gaston up here in the North Atlantic. Now we have some tropical storm warnings up around the Azores. We've got a little tropical wave west-southwest Cabo Verde Islands, another one coming off Africa. But again, our focus is going to be down here in the Caribbean. So you see Fiona, it's getting more symmetric. Looks to me like this one's getting a little bit better organized. So Bermuda under the gun, hurricane warning there. But our system, the Caribbean, doesn't look like much, right? That's why we say today, unlikely to see a whole lot happen out of this, and maybe even tomorrow. Part of what's holding it at bay right now is actually tied into Fiona. The outflow from Fiona is imparting some north and northeast wind shear on it. Remember, these tropical systems don't like wind shear, so there's some wind shear from Fiona hitting the system in the Caribbean right now. But as Fiona lifts northward and the Caribbean system moves a little more westward, that wind shear will let up. And the one in the Caribbean is also close to the coast of South America and Venezuela, which is typically not ideal. So over the next 24 hours, as it starts to create a little separation and get more over open water here in the Caribbean, that will probably also aid in some additional development. All right, let's give you a look at the computer models. I'm going to bring it up full screen now and give you a look at what the models are showing on the Caribbean system going forward. So we're going to advance this right on into the weekend and pause at 7 o'clock. And already by 7 o'clock Sunday evening, what you'll note is a decent spread in the model guidance. You've got tracks anywhere from the southern coast of Cuba to just off the coast of Honduras and Nicaragua, easy for me to say at that point in time. But general ideas, maybe somewhere in the vicinity, a little west of Jamaica, the Cayman Islands. That's where we've got it by Sunday evening. So pretty high confidence we'll have something in the western, northwestern Caribbean by Sunday evening. Now, as I advance the models farther out in time, and we take it through Tuesday evening, about 7:30 Tuesday evening, look at the split that you've got there. You've got models that take it anywhere from South Florida to guidance that takes it into the Yucatan Peninsula. So a much bigger split as we get into early next week and as this begins to make its way into the southeastern Gulf of Mexico. So that's why we have pretty good confidence we'll have a named storm here, we think, in the northwestern Caribbean over the weekend and headed towards the Gulf of Mexico into early next week. But where exactly it's headed from there, confidence really drops off. And there's a number of reasons for that. We'll get into it. Number one, we don't even have a system that's really developed yet. Number two, naturally, the farther out you get in time, the less confident we are in forecast, the bigger the margin of error. And then we're going to get into some of the steering uncertainty too that leads into some of this model split that you see showing up here as well. Let's give you another model perspective. So this graphic that I'm going to show you here is the GFS and the European model on the same map at the same time. And sort of the light blue, that's the European model. The shade of red is the GFS. These circles, these are isobars, lines of equal pressure. So what you watch here is I show you this graphic. The more circles you see, the stronger the low pressure is. So this is Fiona, and you can see a bunch of circles because we know Fiona is an intense Category 4 hurricane right now, but we're going to focus not so much on Fiona, but more so on what happens down the Caribbean. So let me advance this, and we'll bring it up full screen once again. If you look at those two little small circles showing up in the Caribbean, let me point them out for you right down in here. Two little small circles. So by Friday, 7 o'clock in the evening, both the European and GFS showing at least a weak low pressure center developing, but it looks weak. That's why we say today unlikely to have a depression or anything out of this, and maybe even get through tomorrow without anything being classified. It's possible it happens by tomorrow, but it looks more likely to happen into the weekend. So as I advance this farther out in time, and we're going to pause again. So now this is Sunday evening at 7 o'clock, and you start to see a bit of a divergence here in the model guidance, a bit of a split showing up. Again, the European in light blue, GFS in red. At this point in time, I measured earlier, they're roughly about 175 miles apart. It's already a decent gap by the time we get to Sunday evening. Looks like they're showing similar intensities. The GFS may be a little more intense. And you know, that's in the same general area, right in the northwestern Caribbean, but there's a bit of a split showing up. Now, let's advance this into early next week, Tuesday evening, and what you see is both of them intensify the system. That's a trend we don't want to see, right? So that looks like a hurricane moving into the southeastern Gulf of Mexico, but look at the split that is developing here. As I measured that earlier, that's now roughly about 350 miles apart, those two models. So a pretty big split showing up. So there you see another illustration of how confidence in the forecast, the track at least, really starts to drop off as we get into early next week, and as this is potentially headed into the Gulf of Mexico. So we kind of need to sit tight right now, let things play out over the next couple of days, and then hopefully as we get into the weekend, we start to get a better idea of where this might be headed. Now, one thing that we know should aid in some development and intensification as it moves farther west into the Caribbean, what I've plotted here, these aren't water temperatures. This is actually the heat content in the ocean, in the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Atlantic. So what we're talking about is not only where's the water warm, where is that warm water deep? That's really important for tropical systems because as they move over the ocean, a lot of wind with a tropical system, right? It stirs up the ocean. So sometimes they can stir up cooler water from below, and that's kind of a negative feedback on the system, kind of limits its potential to develop, can sometimes even weaken it if it stirs up too much cool water. But if it moves over an area where that warm water is really deep, it's an endless supply of fuel, basically. So we see these shades of kind of purple, magenta in the northwestern Caribbean. It so happens where this system is going to be tracking this weekend, that is some of the deepest, warmest water you'll find anywhere in the Atlantic basin. So that's certainly, we think, going to be favorable for this thing to develop. And you see, these are the forecast models plotted over it. You see how they take it right over that pool of very deep, very warm water. So that's one thing. We also know, remember, the ocean is only one part of the equation. You can have all the warm water in the world, but if the atmosphere isn't cooperating, you're not going to get a tropical system or an intensifying tropical system. Unfortunately, now does it look like we're going to have this warm, deep water here in the northwestern Caribbean? It looks like the atmosphere is going to be favorable. We don't see much wind shear. In fact, wind shear looks very light as it stands right now. So it looks like by the time, by late in the weekend, as it's in the northwestern Caribbean, both the atmosphere and the ocean will be working in concert to probably help this thing intensify. All right, let's run through some of the steering influences now. This is the European model, so let me point out some key features. Number one, high pressure over the Atlantic. This is what we sometimes refer to as the Bermuda High. We've got high pressure over the southern U.S. right now. What's keeping us so hot and dry locally right now. And then this L, you see, that is Fiona. So I'm going to advance this. We're going to pause at a few different points. All right, so now we're on the Saturday morning. There's Fiona lifting up into the Canadian Maritimes. Now, it's going to transition probably about that time as it's reaching Atlantic Canada into a non-tropical low, but a very intense one. So regardless of whether it's a hurricane or a non-tropical low, the impacts are going to be kind of similar, and those look to be major impacts from Nova Scotia into Newfoundland. This is going to be an unusual system, big impact up that way. But as we look at the steering influences for our Caribbean system, here's a minor reflection of it in the European Saturday morning. We've got high pressure over the Western Atlantic and still high pressure over the southern U.S. So I'm going to advance it again. We're going to pause at Monday morning, and now what do you notice here? We get a bit of a trough developing over the eastern half of the country, and that kind of makes a break in between these two high pressure centers over the Atlantic and over the southwestern U.S. In the meantime, our system, in theory, is here in the northwestern Caribbean. So that break in the two high pressure centers as this trough develops, that kind of provides an opening for this to start turning more north and northwest by late in the weekend. We feel fairly confident it is going to start turning north or northwest, but the question is going to be, how soon does that start happening and how sharp of a turn is it? All right, so that's Monday morning. Now watch what the European does. The European basically shows this tropical system linking up with that trough and being drawn to the north over the eastern Gulf between those two high pressure centers. So that's Wednesday morning. So the European right now, as is much, if not most of our model guidance, is implying a greater threat over the eastern Gulf of Mexico, basically showing the system being influenced by this trough, captured and taken up to the north across the eastern Gulf of Mexico. Now, let me show you the scenario that is a little more concerning for our part of the world, but it's highly uncertain, and it's also a little bit of an outlier as it stands right now. That would be the GFS model. So again, high pressure over the Atlantic, high pressure over the southern U.S. This is Fiona. We'll advance it to Saturday morning. From now through Saturday morning, the GFS and the European are pretty similar. So I'm not going to talk about Saturday much. Let's advance it to Monday. Even here, not too dissimilar. We've got the trough developing over the eastern United States, high pressure over the western Atlantic, high pressure over the southwestern U.S., a bit of a break developing in between that should open the door for our tropical system to begin turning more northwest and potentially northward. But the difference here is, number one, the GFS does keep the system a bit farther south in its journey through the Caribbean. And then as I advance this from Monday morning on into Wednesday, because it's farther south, has it moving a little more slowly, the trough essentially kind of misses it. High pressure starts building back in from the Atlantic, which is what shoves this farther westward into the Gulf, which is the scenario obviously we wouldn't want to see. So that gives you an idea, at least the range of possibilities that are on the board right now. So the GFS, if we extrapolate that out in time, certainly implies a bit more of a threat farther west in the Gulf, whereas most of our other guidance is closer to what the European has. What I showed you at the beginning, more of a threat for the eastern Gulf, and models like the European even show the potential of maybe 2 U.S. landfalls, maybe one in Florida, one along the East Coast. So uncertainty is high. So again, until we get that center of circulation that forms and actually develops, and until we kind of see these features evolve over the weekend, there's going to be uncertainty. What I'm telling you here is, between now and maybe even Saturday, we're not going to get a whole lot more confidence in the forecast. Probably going to take a couple of days. All right, that's most of what I had on the Caribbean system. We'll come back in a moment to try and take a couple of questions. I did want to quickly hit on the rest of the Atlantic, though. And again, it looks like Fiona is maybe intensifying this morning. There's Gaston. We've got this tropical wave out over the open Atlantic. Doesn't look like that's going to do a whole lot. But this tropical wave coming off Africa with a decent chance of development. All right, here are 2 named systems right now. So the red Bermuda now under a hurricane warning as of 10 a.m. Fiona's wind still at 130 miles per hour, moving to the north-northeast. Gaston has 65 mile per hour winds. And again, we now have tropical storm warnings for the Azores. You don't see that one all that often. And you see the forecast for Fiona. The L here indicating that it's becoming a non-tropical low, because look, the wind's still shown at 90 miles per hour as it's potentially moving into Nova Scotia. That's going to be a huge impact. The winds, the surf, the surge, all of that. And then Gaston just meanders out over the open Atlantic, also kind of becoming a non-tropical low. The other two systems, the one that's kind of between Africa and the Lesser Antilles, 30% chance of development. Again, not too worried about that one. The one by Africa, 60% chance. Here's what's interesting about that one. That one looks like it's going to curve northward, so it shouldn't be a long-term issue for the United States or us. But one thing you might have seen on social media or heard some people say is some people are calling the Caribbean system future Hermine. Be careful with that. There is some potential that this system could even become a named storm before the Caribbean one does. So I can't rule out the one near Africa maybe grabbing the name Hermine. If it does, the next name up in the Caribbean or the next name up in general is Ian. So we'll see how that plays out, but just a little tidbit. Otherwise, quick check on our forecast. Today, near record high, 97 is what we're forecasting. That would put us within a degree of a record high for today that was set all the way back in 1921, if you could believe that, 101 years ago. And then we're going to continue with the heat into the weekend, mid-90s through Sunday. We do have a slight chance of rain arriving Sunday into early Monday as a cold front moves on in. And then as that front moves through, we should hopefully start to get a little bit of relief and a little more in the way of at least some early fall weather with afternoon highs in the mid to upper 80s and your morning lows more in the low to mid 60s. All right, I was kind of regrouping there to pull up Facebook and see if you guys have any questions. So for those of you watching on Facebook, pop your questions in the comments and we'll see if we can answer a couple. So Lisa's saying we're in that uncertainty always. Yeah, we've been in the cone of uncertainty quite a bit the last few years, although this year has been unusually quiet in the Gulf of Mexico. No named storms yet in the Gulf of Mexico. It's been a long time since we've made it this deep into the hurricane season without a named storm in the Gulf. In fact, since 1991 when we had the year before Andrew. All right, let me scroll through here. What's the phone number for the WAFB weather line? If you call the station's main phone number, 383-9999, there are several options you can choose from. You can get a recorded weather forecast from that number. Let's see. Gino, good tidbit here. I think we should just be prepared. Absolutely. So we're doing the update this morning, not to hype anything, not to scare anybody. This is just kind of an awareness sort of thing. Just keep an eye on it. Be ready just in case. Right now, it still looks like, we're looking down the road a bit. Still looks like eventually as this moves into the Gulf, if we were putting odds on things, greater odds it stays to our east. But we talked about that GFS scenario and the potential of it going farther west into the Gulf. So that's why I want to at least talk about it. Lisa, should we be worried or just wait and watch? I think that's what I was just saying. Just wait and watch at this point. All right, give me a moment here. We're on more than one page, so let me hop over to our other. And just, I was looking at questions on my Facebook page. Let me go over to our Channel 9 Facebook page, see if, all right. Keith saying, what is the depth of the Gulf heat content? Let me see if I can pull this. Give me a moment here. I'm going to scroll back through my maps and see if we can get back to that heat content map to kind of get back to Keith's question a little bit. Oops, I think I flew by it there. Let's see if we can get back to it. Where are we at? Give me a moment. Looks like this graphic is going to have to run through before it lets me advance. I may have to run through this one. So ultimately, how deep is that warm water? Keith, I didn't look at the specific numbers, but sometimes when we talk about this deep warm water, we're talking about warm water on the magnitude of at least 80 degrees warm that can extend, finally got to the graphic, that can extend several hundred feet below the surface. Pretty remarkable when you think about it. There are some products we can look at that will tell us exactly how deep that warm water is, but suffice to say, when you see something like this, you're looking at water that's at least probably on the order of 80 degrees and probably extends several hundred feet below the surface. So a very deep source of warm water. Let's see. What else? New Orleans News reporting Louisiana or Mississippi might get hit. It's in the range of possibilities, but it's very early in the game. I showed you even just when it's entering the Gulf, you've got model guidance anywhere from South Florida to the Yucatan. So that's why I say right now we're giving an early heads up, but any speculation on where it ends up along the Gulf Coast really is just speculation at this point. Way too soon to say. Let's see what else we've got here. Is it possible it's headed to Cancun? Maybe, I don't know if Belinda has a cruise headed down that way or somebody, a lot of cruises head down. Certainly Cancun, Cozumel are going to have to keep an eye on this as we get into the Sunday, Monday time frame. Can't rule out it may be moving that far west. That's more on the western edge of the guidance, more like that GFS scenario, whereas more of the guidance keeps a little bit east of Cancun and Cozumel, but certainly areas around there need to keep an eye on it. Let's see. Let's see if anybody else has any other questions. Somebody was asking which model is this. We ran through a bunch. We ran through the spaghetti plots and also showed the GFS and the European. So I'm sorry I didn't see that comment when it popped up live, but we ran through several. And if you didn't catch it live, at least on Facebook, you'll be able to watch this. And I think our digital team is also going to be posting this recording on our website, WAP.com. So if you want to go back and watch any part you missed, you can do it that way. Here's a common question. This is a good one. What tends to be more accurate, the GFS or the Euro? That comes in from Jennifer. Okay, both of those models have their victories and defeats. You know, for a number of years, when it came to hurricane season, you saw a lot of people trumpeting the European model, and often the European model was doing better. But in recent years, the GFS has had a number of victories, and it really varies storm to storm and season to season. So right now, I wouldn't focus too much on any particular model. What we look for when we're kind of early in the game, like we are right now, are what are the trends? And right now, you kind of have that split. You've got the European and most of the other model guidance that are more focused eventually on the Eastern Gulf, and the GFS is a bit of an outlier in taking this farther west into the Gulf. So typically when you talk about outliers, and the outlier in this case, the GFS being the one that'd be a little worse for us, that's kind of good news that it's an outlier right now, right? More the consensus is to our east. So we'll take that as some small good news right now, but it also means, hey, that potential is on the board. That is a reliable model. We need to watch it. And that's just the inherent uncertainty of not having a coherent system to track yet, and the uncertainty of how do those steering features play out through time. So we will watch it. But that's a good question. Let's see if there's anything else. Yeah, which tend to be accurate on average. Again, kind of touched on that. If you go to the National Hurricane Center website, or you can Google NHC model verification, something like that. They do post the model verification statistics for every year. So you can actually go Google it. If you're that interested in it, you can go find those numbers. You will see them, though. They vary year to year. And even, here's the problem if you try to latch on to one model. Even in seasons where, say, the European outperforms the GFS, there can be individual storms where the GFS outperforms the European in that season, okay? So you got to be real careful. That's why you lean on guys like me to try and do some of the interpretation and give you our thoughts. All right, let's see. Is there anything else? Possible timeline, good question. I'm glad you asked that. I forgot to kind of mention that. So we had, let me see if I can get back. Let me run through this. real quickly again. So this is the plot that shows the European, the GFS models. So this is Sunday evening, kind of in the Western Caribbean. And I have this stopping here Tuesday evening, next Tuesday at 7 o'clock. Let me bring that up full screen for you to get a better look. So that's next Tuesday at 7 o'clock. So it's probably late Monday, Tuesday. This is starting to move into the southeastern Gulf. So in terms of potential Gulf Coast impacts, we're still talking about a week off if and when this were to impact the Gulf Coast. So that's why, again, there's a lot of uncertainty. You guys, most of you along the Gulf Coast that are watching, that have followed hurricane seasons before, know the uncertainty that comes with these things, especially when you're talking a week or more out. So we are talking probably at least a week from a potential Gulf Coast impact. Last time a storm made landfall this late in the season, it certainly happens. You know, we'll be a little bit beyond Rita, but I think the anniversary of Rita, if I remember right, is coming up here in a couple of days. When you get in October, you go back to storms like Lily that impacted us in October. We had Isidore right before Lily, a week before. Just a couple of years ago, we had a Category 3 Hurricane Zeta that hit all the way at the end of October. Now, that was a bit unusual. October storms do happen, though. So 2 years ago, we had one in late October in Zeta, and a major impact at that. That was unusual, but it happens. All right, let's see if there's anything else. I think that's we'll probably go ahead and wrap it up with that. So there's your update on the tropics, in particular in the system in the Caribbean. Stay with us. I'll be back tomorrow. We'll cover this in detail and we'll get you through it. I think it's probably the weekend before we start to get a little better idea on the Gulf Coast crack and potential impacts. So I know we all get a little bit restless with this, but hang tight. Let this kind of play out. Hey, you know, there's always the chance that this doesn't develop, but right now it's pretty strong model consensus that something will develop here into the weekend. So from there, let's let it develop first, then hopefully we'll get a better idea. But updates on WAFB Plus, that's our free app for Roku, Amazon Fire, and your Apple TV, on our free First Alert weather app, on our website, WAFB.com, and of course, all of our newscasts. We'll see you back here. We've got Jared and Jeff in later on today. I'll be back tomorrow morning.